On a cold autumn evening in rural America, the neon lights outside a small-town biker clubhouse flickered against the wind. Most people crossed the street when they passed the building. The black and red logo of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club on the door was enough to scare them away. But not her. She was 92 years old. Her name was Margaret Collins. Her coat was thin. Her hands trembled. A faint purple bruise marked her cheekbone. She held a small paper bag with everything she owned, and she pushed the door open. Inside, the room went quiet. Leather jackets, heavy boots. Bearded men who looked like they had lived through wars no one talked about. Country rock hummed from an old jukebox. Margaret stepped forward slowly, leaning on her cane. "Excuse me," she said softly. Can I work here?" A few bikers exchanged confused glances. One muttered, "Mom, this isn't a diner." From the back of the room, a tall, gray-bearded biker named Rick stood up. He had arms covered in tattoos and eyes that had seen too much of the world. "Why would you want to work here?" he asked gently. Margaret swallowed. Because I don't have anywhere else to go." Silence. Rick pulled out a chair for her. Up close, he noticed the bruise wasn't old. It was fresh. "Who did that to you?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "My grandson, he gets frustrated, says I'm a burden. Yesterday he told me to leave." Her voice didn't shake. That was the heartbreaking part. It sounded like she was used to being unwanted. The men in the room shifted uncomfortably. These were guys who rode across states and storms, men who feared nothing. But this hit different. Margaret continued, "I can cook and clean. I can clean. I can sew patches back onto jackets. I just need a place where I'm not in the way." Rick looked around at his brothers. Without a word, something passed between them. He turned back to her. "You're not in the way," he said firmly. "Not here." That night, they made her tea. Yeah. Someone brought her a bowl of chili. Another found a soft blanket from the storage room. Margaret sat at the long wooden table, surrounded by bikers who had once been judged by their appearance their entire lives. For the first time in months, she smiled. Over the next few days, she came back. She swept the floor, organized old paperwork, repaired torn riding gloves with steady, careful stitches. She even scolded one biker for not washing his hands before dinner. The clubhouse began to change. The men started showing up earlier. They cleaned up more. They argued less. Margaret listened to their stories about broken families, lost friends, mistakes they couldn't undo. She never judged. She just nodded and said, "You're still here. That means you can still do good." One afternoon, Rick asked quietly, "Why didn't you call the police?" She looked at her tea. "He's my grandson. If I ruin his life, what was the point of living this long?" Rick's jaw tightened. He understood loyalty, but he also understood lines that shouldn't be crossed. Without telling her, two club members went to speak to the grandson. They didn't threaten him. They didn't raise their voices. They just made it very clear. Margaret was not alone anymore. Strangely, the grandson called her the next week, apologized, said he'd been overwhelmed and ashamed of his own failures, asked if she was safe. Margaret looked around the clubhouse at the men laughing over a game of pool. Yes," she said softly. "I am. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the highway outside town. The bikers installed a small heater in the corner just for her chair. They added a nameplate above it, a grandmommer." On Christmas Eve, Margaret brought homemade cookies. The bikers, who usually exchanged nothing more than handshakes, surprised her with something special, a leather vest. On the back, instead of the usual club patch, it read, "Honorary Angel." Margaret's hands trembled as she touched the stitching. "I've never belonged anywhere," she whispered. Rick knelt beside her chair. "That makes you braver than any of us." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry loudly. She just held his hand. Word spread quietly around town. People who once avoided the clubhouse started dropping off donations, blankets, canned food, even job applications for the bikers' charity, rides. Because something had shifted. It wasn't about leather jackets or loud engines anymore. It was about a 92-year-old woman who had walked through a door everyone else was afraid of, and a group of men who had been misunderstood their whole lives, choosing kindness when it mattered most. Margaret never officially worked there. She became family. And sometimes when new visitors nervously stepped inside the clubhouse, the first thing they saw wasn't rows of intimidating bikers. It was a tiny elderly woman in a rocking chair by the heater, smiling gently and saying, "Oh, don't worry, sweetheart. They look scary, but they've got good hearts. And somehow, in that small American town, faith in people was restored, one unlikely family at a time.